Major General Edgar Feuchtinger sat in his Paris apartment drinking wine with his mistress. His uniform jacket hung on a chair. His phone was off the hook. Outside his window, the City of Light slept peacefully. 90 miles north across the English Channel, the largest invasion fleet in human history was already moving. 5,000 ships, 150,000 men, and Feuchtinger, commander of the only panzer division positioned near the landing beaches, had no idea. This wasn't a failure of courage. This was a failure of everything. The wall that couldn't fail. For 3 years, Nazi propaganda had promised the Atlantic Wall was impregnable. From Norway to Spain, 2,400 miles of coastline, fortified with bunkers, obstacles, mines, and artillery. Hitler himself declared it the strongest defense line ever built. The statistics seemed to prove it. 15,000 concrete bunkers, 6.5 million mines, 500,000 beach obstacles. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, had spent 6 months personally inspecting every defensive position from Denmark to Brittany. Rommel believed in preparation. He ordered 4 million mines laid in just the Normandy sector. He designed underwater obstacles tipped with explosives to rip open landing craft. He flooded fields behind the beaches to drown paratroopers. He positioned artillery to create interlocking fields of fire that would turn the surf red. On paper, the math was simple. Any Allied landing would face 30 minutes of murderous fire before reaching the seawall. 30 minutes where German machine guns, mortars, and artillery would decimate exposed troops on open beaches. Rommel calculated Allied casualties at 90% in the first wave. The Allies would need a miracle. The Germans just needed to be awake. The perfect storm. June 5th, 1944. Weather across the English Channel was miserable. Wind gusts reached 30 miles per hour. Waves climbed to 6 feet. Rain hammered the French coast. German meteorologists analyzed the data and reached a unanimous conclusion. Invasion impossible. No navy could launch an amphibious assault in these conditions. The Allied weather window wouldn't open for at least 2 weeks. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander West, agreed. So did Field Marshal Hugo Sperle of the Luftwaffe. Every German general staff officer concurred. The science was clear. The Atlantic was too rough. The Allies would wait. Based on this intelligence, Rommel made a decision that would haunt him forever. On June 5th at 0600 hours, he climbed into his staff car and drove to Germany. His wife's birthday was June 6th. He hadn't seen her in months. The invasion wasn't coming. He could afford 48 hours away from his command. He was wrong by 42 hours. The impossible forecast. What the Germans didn't know was that British meteorologist Group Captain James Stagg had found something their weather stations missed. A brief window, 36 hours of marginal but possible conditions starting June 6th at dawn. The seas would still be rough. The winds would still be dangerous. Men would vomit in landing craft. Paratroopers would be scattered miles off target. It wasn't ideal. It was barely acceptable, but it was enough. General Dwight Eisenhower stared at weather maps for 15 minutes in silence, then spoke 3 words that changed history. Okay, let's go. The German meteorologists never saw it coming because they lacked weather stations in the mid-Atlantic. Their forecasts were blind beyond 300 miles offshore. The Allies had cracked their weather codes and knew exactly what German commanders were reading. Stagg's forecast was based on data the Germans physically could not access. Rommel drove east toward Germany, confident. Von Rundstedt went to bed early. Luftwaffe patrols were grounded due to weather. Kriegsmarine destroyers stayed in port. And across the Channel, 5,000 ships began moving through the dark. The first clues. June 6th, Corporal Werner Kortenhaus stood guard at a radar station near Cherbourg. His screen showed something impossible, hundreds of contacts, maybe thousands. The English Channel was filling with ships. He called his commanding officer, who was asleep. The officer told him the equipment was malfunctioning. "It's the weather," he said. "Atmospheric interference. Go back to your post." Kortenhouse stared at his screen. The contacts kept multiplying. Pathfinder paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne began landing across Normandy. Most missed their drop zones by miles. The wind scattered them like leaves. German sentries heard aircraft overhead but assumed they were bombers heading inland. The paralysis reports flooded into 7th Army headquarters. Paratroopers landing near Carentan, gliders crashing in fields, resistance sabotage cutting phone lines. But the reports were fragmentary, contradictory, impossible to verify. General Friedrich Dahlmann, 7th Army commander, faced a decision. Wake up von Rundstedt, alert the Panzer Reserves, or wait for daylight to assess the situation? He waited. The massive naval bombardment began. 7 battleships, 23 cruisers, and over 100 destroyers opened fire simultaneously. In 30 minutes, they fired more shells than the entire German Navy possessed. Lieutenant Gustav Wenzel, manning a bunker at Omaha Beach, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The ocean had disappeared behind a wall of ships. It was, he later wrote, as if someone had built a city on the water overnight. His bunker shook. Concrete dust filled the air. The noise was beyond comprehension, but the bunker held. Rommel's fortifications were working. Wenzel grabbed his machine gun and waited. The fatal delay. General Erich Marx, commander of 84th Corps, finally understood. This wasn't a raid. This wasn't a feint. This was the invasion. He picked up his phone to request panzer reinforcements. Only Adolf Hitler could authorize moving the armored reserves. But Hitler had taken sleeping pills at 0300 hours and left orders not to be disturbed. Nobody dared wake the Führer. Marx slammed down the phone. The 21st Panzer Division sat 20 miles from the beaches, engines cold, waiting for orders that wouldn't come for 6 more hours. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, finally awake and briefed, requested permission to move the panzers. The response from Hitler's headquarters: "The Führer is still sleeping. We cannot wake him for this." Von Rundstedt stared at his staff in disbelief. 150,000 enemy soldiers were pouring onto French soil, and they couldn't wake Hitler because he'd had a late night. Rommel's staff car was racing back from Germany. He'd been on the road for 3 hours, speeding through the French countryside, listening to increasingly frantic radio reports. He would later say that June 6, 1944, was the longest day of his life, and he was still 300 miles from his headquarters. The window closes. By the time Hitler woke and authorized panzer movement at 1400 hours, it was too late. Allied fighter bombers dominated the skies. German tanks trying to reach the coast were strafed, bombed, and forced to hide during daylight. The 21st Panzer Division wouldn't reach the battlefield until evening, when the Allies had already secured their beachheads. Major General Feuchtinger, finally located in his Paris apartment at 1100 hours, rushed to his division. He arrived to find his tanks scattered, his officers confused, and his opportunity gone. The Atlantic Wall had held for 6 hours, but those 6 hours required the panzers to arrive, to counterattack, to drive the Allies back into the sea. Instead, the panzers sat idle because nobody could wake Hitler, because Rommel was celebrating a birthday, because weather forecasters missed a 36-hour window. Aftermath. By 2400 hours on June 6th, the Allies had landed 156,000 troops on French soil. German casualties, approximately 1,000 killed. Allied casualties, approximately 10,000, including 4,000 dead. Those numbers tell the real story. The Atlantic Wall worked exactly as designed. The lesson: the Germans didn't fail because their defenses were weak. The Atlantic Wall was arguably the most formidable defensive system ever built. They didn't fail because their soldiers lacked courage. The beach defenders fought with desperate ferocity. They failed because of 6 hours of paralysis. 6 hours when weather forecasters missed a narrow window. When Rommel was 300 miles away. When nobody dared wake Hitler. when Panzer divisions sat idle, engines cold, waiting for permission that came too late. The Atlantic Wall still stands in places. You can visit the bunkers, walk the beaches, see the concrete fortifications that were supposed to be impregnable. But they tell a different story than Hitler intended. They're monuments to the fatal gap between perfect planning and human reaction time. If you found this story compelling, let us know in the comments what other D-Day perspectives we should explore. And subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the moments that changed history.